Nehemiah, chapter 5. Some of the men and their wives complained about the Jews in power and said,
"We have large families, and it takes a lot of grain merely to keep them alive."
Others said,
"During the famine, we even had to mortgage our fields, vineyards, and homes to them in order to buy grain."
Then others said,
"We had to borrow money from those in power to pay the government tax on our fields and vineyards."
"We are Jews just as they are, and our children are as good as theirs, but we still have to sell our children as slaves, and some of our daughters have already been raped. We are completely helpless. Our fields and vineyards have even been taken from us."
When I heard their complaints and their charges, I became very angry. So I thought it over and said to the leaders and officials, "How can you charge your own people interest?" Then I called a public meeting and accused the leaders by saying, "We have tried to buy back all of our people who were sold into exile, but here you are selling more of them for us to buy back." The officials and leaders did not say a word because they knew this was true. I continued, "What you have done is wrong. We must honor our God by the way we live so the Gentiles can't find fault with us. My relatives, my friends, and I are also lending money and grain, but we must no longer demand payment in return. Now give back the fields, vineyards, olive orchards, and houses you have taken, and also the interest you have been paid." The leaders answered,
"We will do whatever you say and return their property without asking to be repaid."
So I made the leaders promise in front of the priests to give back the property. Then I emptied my pockets and said, "If you don't keep your promise, that's what God will do to you. He will empty out everything you own, even taking away your houses." The people answered,
"We will keep our promise."
Then they praised the Lord and did as they had promised. I was governor of Judah from the 20th year that Artaxerxes was king until the 32nd year. And during these entire 12 years, my relatives and I refused to accept the food that I was allowed. Each governor before me had been a burden to the people by making them pay for his food and wine, and by demanding 40 silver coins a day. Even their officials had been a burden to the people. But I respected God, and I didn't think it was right to be so hard on them. I spent all my time getting the wall rebuilt and did not buy any property. Everyone working for me did the same thing. I usually fed 150 of our own Jewish people and their leaders, as well as foreign visitors from surrounding lands. Each day, 1 ox, 6 of the best sheep, and lots of chickens were prepared. Then every 10 days, a large supply of wine was brought in. I knew what a heavy burden this would have been for the people, and so I did not ask for my food allowance as governor. I pray that God will bless me for everything I have done for my people.
Nehemiah, chapter 6.
Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and our other enemies learned that I had completely rebuilt the wall. All I lacked was hanging the doors and the gates. Then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message asking me to meet with them in one of the villages in Ono Valley. I knew they were planning to harm me in some way, so I sent messengers to tell them, "My work is too important to stop now and go there. I can't afford to slow down the work just to visit with you." They invited me 4 times, but each time I refused to go. Finally, Sanballat sent an official to me with an unsealed letter which said,
"A rumor is going around among the nations that you and the other Jews are rebuilding the wall and planning to rebel because you want to be their king. And Geshem says it's true. You even have prophets in Jerusalem claiming you are now the king of Judah. You know the Persian king will hear about this. So let's get together and talk it over."
I sent a message back to Sanballat saying, "None of this is true. You are making it all up." Our enemies were trying to frighten us and to keep us from our work, but I asked God to give me strength. One day I went to visit Shemaiah. He was looking very worried, and he said,
"Let's hurry to the holy place of the temple and hide there. We will lock the temple doors because your enemies are planning to kill you tonight."
I answered, "Why should someone like me have to run and hide in the temple to save my life? I won't go." Suddenly, I realized that God had not given Shemaiah this message, but Tobiah and Sanballat had paid him to trick me and to frighten me into doing something wrong, because they wanted to ruin my good name. Then I asked God to punish Tobiah and Sanballat for what they had done. I prayed that God would punish the prophet Noadiah and the other prophets who, together with her, had tried to frighten me. On the 25th day of the month of Elul, the wall was completely rebuilt. It had taken 52 days. When our enemies in the surrounding nations learned that the work was finished, they felt helpless because they knew that our God had helped us rebuild the wall. All this time, the Jewish leaders and Tobiah had been writing letters back and forth. Many people in Judah were loyal to Tobiah for two reasons. Shechaniah, son of Era, was his father-in-law, and Tobiah's son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. The people would always tell me about the good things Tobiah had done, and then they would tell Tobiah everything I had said. So Tobiah kept sending letters, trying to frighten me.
Nehemiah chapter 7.
After the wall had been rebuilt and the gates hung, then the temple guards, the singers, and the other Levites were assigned their work. I put my brother Hanani in charge of Jerusalem, along with Hananiah, the commander of the fortress, because Hananiah could be trusted, and he respected God more than most people did. I said to them, "Don't let the gates to the city be opened until the sun has been up for a while, and make sure that they are closed and barred before the guards go off duty at sunset. Choose people from Jerusalem to stand guard at different places around the wall, and others to stand guard near their own houses." Although Jerusalem covered a large area, not many people lived there, and no new houses had been built. So God gave me the idea to bring together the people, their leaders, and officials, and to check the family records of those who had returned from captivity in Babylonia after having been taken there by King Nebuchadnezzar. About this time, I found records of those who had been the first to return to Jerusalem from Babylon province. By reading these records, I learned that they settled in their own hometowns, and that they had come with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Rehemiah, Nehemiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mispirith, Bigvai, Nehum, and Baanah.
Here is how many had returned from each family group.
2,172 from Parosh, 372 from Shephatiah, 652 from Era, 2,818 from Pahath Moab, who were all descendants of Jeshua and Joab, 1,254 from Elam, 845 from Zatu, 760 from Zakkai, 648 from Binnui, 628 from Bebai, 2,322 from Asgad, 667 from Adonikam, 2,067 from Bigvai, 655 from Adin, 98 from Ater, also known as Hezekiah, 328 from Hashem, 324 from Bezai, 112 from Hariph, and 95 from Gibeon.
Here is how many people returned whose ancestors had come from the following towns.
188 from Bethlehem and Netophah, 128 from Anathoth, 42 from Beth Asmaveth, 743 from Kiriath Jearim, Kephirah, and Beeroth, 621 from Ramah and Geba, 122 from Michmash, 123 from Bethel and Ai, 52 from Nebo, 1,254 from Elam, 320 from Haram, 345 from Jericho, 721 from Lod, Hadid, and Ono, and 3,930 from Sanea.
Here is how many returned from each family of priests.
973 descendants of Jeshua from Judea, 1,052 from Immer, 1,247 from Pashur, and 1,017 from Haram.
Here is how many returned from the families of Levites.
74 descendants of Hodiva from the families of Jeshua and Kadmiel, 148 descendants of Asaph from the temple musicians, and 138 descendants of Shallum, Ater, Talmon, Akab, Hatita, and Shobai from the temple guards.
Here are the names of the families of temple workers whose descendants returned.
Ziha, Hasufa, Tabioth, Kuras, Saya, Padon, Labana, Hagaba, Shalmai, Hanan, Giddel, Gahar, Reaiah, Rezin, Nekoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Paseah, Besai, Meunim, Nephusim, Bakbuk, Hakufa, Harhur, Basluth, Mehida, Harsha, Barkos, Sisera, Tema, Neziah, and Hatipha.
Here are the names of Solomon's servants whose descendants returned.
Sotai, Sopharith, Perida, Jaela, Darkon, Giddel, Shephatiah, Hattil, Pakarith Hazabiam, and Ammon. A total of 392 descendants of temple workers and of Solomon's servants returned. There were 642 who returned from the families of Delaiah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, though they could not prove they were Israelites. They had lived in the Babylonian towns of Tel Melah, Tel Harsa, Kirub, Adon, and Immer. The families of Hobaiah, Hakaz, and Barzillai could not prove they were priests. The ancestor of the family of Barzillai had married the daughter of Barzillai from Gilead, and had taken his wife's family name. But the records of these three families could not be found, and none of them were allowed to serve as priests. In fact, the governor told them, "You cannot eat the food offered to God until he lets us know if you really are priests." There were 42,360 who returned, in addition to 7,337 servants and 245 musicians. Altogether, they brought with them 736 horses, 245 mules, 435 camels, and 6,720 donkeys. Many people gave gifts to help pay for the materials to rebuild the temple. The governor himself gave 17 pounds of gold, 50 bowls to be used in the temple, and 530 robes for the priests. Family leaders gave 337 pounds of gold and 3,215 pounds of silver. The rest of the people gave 337 pounds of gold, 2,923 pounds of silver, and 67 robes for the priests. And so, by the 7th month, priests, Levites, temple guards, musicians, workers, and many of the ordinary people had settled in the towns of Judah.
Nehemiah, chapter 8.
On the first day of the 7th month, the people came together in the open area in front of the water gate. Then they asked Ezra, who was a teacher of the law of Moses, to read to them from this law that the Lord had given his people. Ezra, the priest, came with the law and stood before the crowd of men, women, and the children who were old enough to understand. From early morning till noon, he read the law of Moses to them, and they listened carefully. Ezra stood on a high wooden platform that had been built for this occasion. Mattathiah, Shema, Anaiah, Uriah, Hilkiah, and Maaseiah were standing to his right, while Pedaiah, Mishael, Malchijah, Hashem, Hashbaddanah, Zechariah, and Meshullam were standing to his left. Ezra was up on the high platform where he could be seen by everyone, and when he opened the book, they all stood up. Ezra praised the great Lord God, and the people shouted, "Amen! Amen!" Then they bowed with their faces to the ground and worshiped the Lord. After this, the Levites, Jeshua, Bani, Sherebiah, Jamin, Akab, Shabbathai, Hodiah, Maaseiah, Kelita, Azariah, Jozabad, Hanan, and Pelaiah went among the people, explaining the meaning of what Ezra had read.
The people started crying when God's law was read to them. Then Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest and teacher, and the Levites who had been teaching the people all said,
"This is a special day for the Lord your God, so don't be sad and don't cry."
Nehemiah told the people,
"Enjoy your good food and wine, and share some with those who didn't have anything to bring. Don't be sad. This is a special day for the Lord, and he will make you happy and strong. The Levites encouraged the people by saying,
This is a sacred day, so don't worry or mourn.
When the people returned to their homes, they celebrated by eating and drinking and by sharing their food with those in need, because they had understood what had been read to them. On the second day of the 7th month, the leaders of all the family groups came together with the priests and Levites, so Ezra could teach them the law that the Lord had given to Moses. They learned from the law that the people of Israel were to live in shelters when they celebrated the festival in the 7th month of the year. They also learned that they were to go into the woods and gather branches of leafy trees such as olives, myrtles, and palms for making these shelters. So the people gathered branches and made shelters on the flat roofs of their houses, in their yards, in the courtyard of the temple, and in the open areas around the Water Gate and Ephraim Gate. Everyone who had returned from Babylonia built shelters. They lived in them and joyfully celebrated the Festival of Shelters for the first time since the days of Joshua, son of Nun. On each of the first 7 days of the festival, Ezra read to the people from God's law. Then on the 8th day, everyone gathered for worship, just as the law had said they must.